Chapter 971 Strategy, Power, and Cunning. It was precisely at this point that the third skill that Xietain had evolved one order using the power of soul manipulation came into play, the third skill that even after a few minutes of battle to the death had not participated, at least not under Tao Ji's knowledge, of course. This was because the third skill Xietain had evolved was invisibility, and he had used it even before exchanging words with the enemy. Actually, Xietain took a certain risk in choosing invisibility to be the third skill to evolve. However, since the requirements were so high and thanks to his instinct, he somehow managed to win the gamble and gain something that was waiting to be revealed until now to expose its value in combat. Invisibility, second order active skill, level 5. Consume 60 mana points to activate without additional consumption for the first 50 seconds and consuming 2 mana points per second after the stipulated time to keep active. The user can consume 20% of the total mana as extra to be untraceable by beings up to 2 orders higher for 3 minutes, being untraceable by beings up to 3 orders above for 3 seconds. Note, effects disappear when revealing murderous intent. Second activation, consume 600 mana points to make invisible up to 5 non-living objects or 1000 mana points to hide 1 living being. Note, the user must be in continuous contact with the objects, otherwise the invisibility will be broken. The reason why the cosmic particle cannon disappeared was because Xietain used the enemy's defensive barrier to his advantage, and when everyone's eyes were focused on his salute spear, he created a clone and used invisibility to send it to the wall. The cosmic particle cannon was always on the wall, but Tao Ji couldn't find out thanks to the second activation of invisibility as Xietain lured him away from the area before the effect faded out. From the beginning until now, leaving aside the enemy's overwhelming magic power, which was a bad surprise, Tao Ji had been playing in the palm of Xietan's hand. This was proof that by using the right tactics, not getting carried away by pride and arrogance after accomplishing great things, and using to the fullest extent possible what one had, even someone weaker could take down someone considerably stronger. Of course, it remained to be seen whether Tao Ji had been taken down by Xietain and company or not. What's that? Shangguan Xinyue exclaimed with astonishment and a slightly pale face as she saw the large, red-colored energy beam closing the distance in an instant and disappearing beyond the small opening her daughter had left in the ice sphere, just as Xietain had instructed her to do beforehand. Xietain did not respond immediately but activated regeneration to replenish his stamina to the maximum, spending only 1 mana point, and then used overlap regeneration to recover his mana to the fullest, all in a second. It was in that second when a terrifying explosion shook the sky and the earth alike. Boom! Shangguan Bingshui was in a weakened state after spending practically 90% of all her mana to create the 4 ice cubes that after her command became the huge ice sphere used to enclose the enemy inside. In fact, had it not been for the earring Xietain had just given her, she might have fainted. The shockwave from the explosion hit the ice walls hard from inside the sphere and millions of fragments flew everywhere. In fact, the shockwave was so powerful, despite being suppressed, that her weakened body flew backwards, uncontrollably, but fortunately for her, Xietain already expected something like that, so he hurriedly caught her while retreating in a hurry. Shangguan Xinyue gritted her teeth, and while using the different gusts of wind to her advantage and to boost her and her allies' speed, she extended her small hand backwards and called out in a loud voice, "Icy winds." Part of the winds blowing in the sky moved at her will and reinforced by her mana began to strengthen the ice sphere, making the ice that was on the verge of collapse become much harder and tougher than before. However, even with almost all of Shangguan Bingshui's mana and the support of a powerful soul evolver such as Shangguan Xinyue, the power of the skill-blazing blood punishment cast by Xietain proved to be far above even if he had restrained himself when he released it to avoid shattering the earth. Boom! Followed by a second blast that caused countless black cracks with golden edges to appear several kilometers around. A dragon-like roar sounded from below just before the giant ice sphere exploded. You have obtained records of 3rd Order Black Calamity Lin Yun level 200. Bai Zemin was not happy despite slaying the beast in the portal. As he hurriedly embraced Shangguan Xingyue and Shangguan Bingshue's bodies and covered them both, Bai Zemin quickly used overlap regeneration and changed his agility points to convert them into health to increase his endurance. Shangguan Xingyue and Shangguan Bingshue did not fight in Bai Zemin's arms, but both women cooperated as they felt the terrifying shockwave blowing towards them at immeasurable speeds. Ice wall, wind wall, blood wall. The three chanted practically at the same time as three thick, glowing walls rose into the sky just a blink of an eye before all hell broke loose. Rumble. The shockwave with purple flames moved outward in an ever-growing ring shape from the center of the explosion as its start point crushed all resistance, turning the three walls into waste practically at the very instant it slammed into them. Bai Zemin felt no pain, but he could certainly feel his body being hit fiercely in the back, and at the same time he tightly clenched his arms around both women. He could not fight against the several mouthfuls of blood with small fragments of flesh that shot out of his mouth. Shangguan Bingshue and Shangguan Xingyue spat blood as well, but thanks to Bai Zemin they were able to withstand the shockwave blow. Otherwise, their bodies might have exploded. In fact, were it not for the fact that Bai Zemin's body could no longer be called a human body, and were it not for the fact that he had overlap regeneration, as well as an armor that greatly suppressed the power of shockwaves, he would have died on the spot. It was not for nothing that Lilith had classified Blazing Blood punishment as a world destroyer attack even in its previous version. Bai Zemin felt his vision dim and had to use all his willpower to keep from closing his eyes, as this would mean the end for him and the rest of them. Died? Shangguan Xingyue asked with a pale face as she stared up at the huge fireball that seemed to cover half the sky and obliterated everything on the ground, constantly expanding and contracting in the distance. This was the first time she had experienced something so terrifying in her entire life. This was the first time Shangguan Xingyue felt so close to death. As she looked at the countless space cracks with white lightning raining down on the earth and devouring everything, she could not help but glance at the young man who was now using them as a support to keep from falling down from the sky with a new level of respect and fear. This level of destructiveness was far beyond what one could explain with words. This was especially true, considering that over 60% of the power of the attack had been suppressed within the ice sphere. Shangguan Xingyue could not help but think that if that attack were to fall on the mainland without any shielding, the entire Inner Mongolia would probably be wiped off the map forever. Shangguan Bingshue looked at the dark expression on Bai Zemin's face before looking back at the huge fireball. That was not different from a son, and responded for him to her mother's question. No. That alligator is still alive. What? Shangguan Xingyue watched in disbelief as, from one side of the huge fireball, a figure in an extremely pitiful state flew out. Don't cough. Don't let him run away. Bai Zemin roared as he ignored his wounds and continued coughing up blood. That monster really had survived through that. Bai Zemin had nothing left to use in this battle. He had given everything in terms of strength and strategy. If the enemy escaped from here and came back later, it would become his worst nightmare, knowing that his chances of victory were close to zero. Damn it. Shangguan Bingshue couldn't help but curse as she looked at Bai Zemin chasing after the enemy despite his wounds. She did not delay as she kicked the air step under her feet and quickly followed him. Shangguan Xingyue gritted her teeth and, while wrapping her body in a wind tornado, chased even faster than the other two. As Tao Ji fled for his life with a horrified expression on his face, he could not help but curse while thanking the gods and heaven for his luck. He really should have died there, if not for a coincidence that would probably never happen again to any living being in the entire universe in the years to come. He would have died a horrible and unfortunate death. King-level attack. A brat who isn't even 100 years old really got his hands on a king-level attack. Tao Ji bellowed in his heart as he increased his movement speed using several skills at the same time without caring at all about mana consumption. A king-level attack was what was known in Tao Xi's time as World Destroyer-type attacks, but on a lower scale. These attacks could usually only be launched by kings of kingdoms with tens or even hundreds of millions of subordinates that boosted the power of that king. Little did he expect to meet such an attack after opening his eyes a few months ago, through countless years on an earth infinitely weaker than before. Had it not been for my body being sucked into a spatial crack and then brought back when the portal with black calamity collapsed, my body would have been torn to fragments. Despite surviving, however, Tao Xi's injuries were not light. His total battle power had fallen below half, especially given the fact that he had lost an arm after being hit by the cosmic particle cannon. I need to retreat for now. I'll prepare that relic's weapons first and then dash. Electric world. Tao Xi's thoughts were interrupted as his entire vision was tinged in purple, and in a fit of rage he roared, "Fuck off!" Tens of thousands of wind blades slashed from around his body outward, cleaving a path in the lightning world, barely taking any damage in the process. Shangguan Xingyue continued to press on for several kilometers, managing to damage Tao Xi's body considerably as he fled. However, Tao Xi was still faster thanks to his vast arsenal of skills and treasures, so there came a point where she could only give her best to catch up with him. It took Tao Xi no more than a few seconds to reach the base wall where he had been before, and the enemy's flame domain was still burning. However, when he saw Xian Kuan's current state, he was shocked and his face turned even paler after realizing that he had been repeatedly tricked by a human kid. Chapter 972 Victory. What Tao Xi saw as he approached the base walls not only frightened him but made his blood boil from the anger he began to feel in his heart, a heart that was beating so hard in his chest that it seemed to be about to burst. All the goblins had died, they had all been turned into nothing after being incinerated by the golden flames of the enemy female that was still standing in the same place as before under the protection of some human powerhouses. As for the sea creatures, Tao Xi did not take long to understand that Xian Kuan stopped using the pagoda's power after seeing that, except for third-order creatures, everyone was being killed easily under the power of the fire domain. The problem was that Xian Kuan was covered in blood while fighting two third-order soul evolvers, among whom Tao Xi recognized the seventh princess, Xian Kuan's sister. Xian Kuan was fighting miserably against his little sister and Nangong Yi. Although Xian Mei was his blood sister, Xian Kuan was being attacked with ferocity and murderous intent just as he would and was doing. Unfortunately, the union of Nangong Yi, whose defense was abnormally high thanks to his dragon transformation skill, and Xian Mei, whose magical skills covered practically every area a mage needed to be powerful, gave him more trouble than he thought he would face. Boom! After a clash between two lightning-covered flood dragons and two sword slashes from Xian Kuan, part of the wall collapsed and the latter was forced to retreat while counterattacking Nangong Yi, inflicting a bloody wound on his chest that began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just at that moment, Xian Kuan sensed Tao Xi's presence, but when he looked towards the horizon and saw the miserable state in which the latter was fleeing under the pursuit of his enemies, the third prince's expression turned pale as a sheet, but there was also a certain relief in his eyes when he saw that Tao Xi had not died. After all, Xian Kuan had seen the cosmic particle cannon appear right before his eyes with a clone of the enemy male. At that moment, when the cannon fired, Xian Kuan had practically given Tao Xi up for dead, therefore, seeing him alive was a pleasant surprise, despite seeing him so badly wounded. Lord Tao Xi. Tao Xi had a serious expression on his face as he pointed the tip of his magic staff forward and said in a deep voice, "Fireblade." The expression on Xian Mei and Nangong Yi's faces turned livid as they saw the huge fire blade slashing towards them. They both retreated back at the same time as Xian Mei launched several attacks, greatly weakening the incoming attack but still unable to stop it. Just at that moment, a huge multicolored barrier appeared in front of the two an instant before they were hit. Boom! The explosion caused more than half of the wall to collapse, and the shockwave killed practically all the soul evolvers and human soldiers that were there. The defensive barrier was soon filled with cracks, but to Tao Ji's surprise it did not break immediately and instead managed to stay firm as the mermaid princess, and the human soul evolver retreated in a hurry. Tao Ji did not chase, but hurriedly approached Xian and waved his magic staff, enveloping them both in a large sphere of wind under Xian bewildered eyes. "Lord Tao Ji, we are retreating," Tao Ji said in a deep voice. "What?" Xian expression turned white not with fear, but with anger as he howled, "Retreating? I've practically lost my entire army here. If we retreat now, my siblings. If we don't retreat now, you will die." Tao Ji glared at him. Xian was about to say something, but just at that moment a purple lightning dragon flashed down from the clouds, and when he felt the terrifying magic power in this attack, his face paled even more as he looked at the human female rushing over from the horizon. "Annoying ant." Tao Ji pointed his magic staff towards the sky and roared, "Lightning storm." Outside the Emperor Wolf domain, the sky was clear blue and Tao Ji had regained that 20% natural stats that had been sealed all this time. When he cast Lightning Storm, the blue sky soon darkened and under Shangguan Xinyue's gloomy face tens of thousands of golden lightning bolts rained down on her. Boom! 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 The lightning dragon was mercilessly struck by thousands of lightning bolts at the same time. Its body did not resist more than a second or two before it was completely torn apart and disappeared without a trace. Shangguan Xinyue was having trouble dodging all the magical attacks, and in fact she had been hit once on her now completely black right arm. Just as Tao Ji was raising his magic staff again, having regained his self-confidence, determined to kill this annoying human female that had given him so many headaches in these few minutes, his expression changed for the worse when he saw the horizon start to turn blood red, and before he could say anything he saw a flash of golden light flying towards him. Jade Emperor Barrier. Boom! Tao Ji's face was deathly pale as he stared at the elegant yet terrifying golden spear spinning like a drill on the surface of the barrier, now filled with cracks which reminded him that his current self needed to retreat in order to recover soon. Looking at Xian, who had fainted with blood pouring out of his hearings due to the terrifying sonic blast at such close range, Tao Ji soared into the sky and sped away. He ignored the yells and taunts of his opponent. Tao Ji was an old dog who had seen everything in the world. He would not be swayed by the taunts of a kid. However, before he disappeared, he pointed toward the wall where the cosmic particle cannon was and said in a cold voice, "Black Hellfire Spear." Just before he vanished, a magic circle 50 meters in diameter appeared in the sky, and a spear of black flames as big as a building shot straight out toward the half-destroyed wall. Nangong Lingxin gritted her teeth upon seeing this and hurriedly activated several skills at the same time. Energy Barrier. Booster. Magic Potency. Double Defense. A bright and huge energy barrier glowed with rainbow colors, and as the giant black flame spear impacted against the barrier, the sky boomed fiercely as the wall collapsed more and more, crushing the buildings below and killing the most unfortunate soldiers in the process. Nangong Lingxin was a level 132 soul evolver. In terms of physical and magical defense, she could even stand above Bai Zemin thanks to a number of her skills, which coupled perfectly well with her main skill, Energy Barrier. However, the power difference between her and Tao Ji was simply too high, and the difference in levels certainly didn't help. The barrier began to crack after 2 seconds of resisting, and as the enemy's magic spear continued to press downward, a pained expression crossed her face. Nangong Lingxin knew that the cosmic particle cannon was too important to Bai Zemin and the faction in general, so she ignored the pain and pretended not to feel the blood slipping out of her mouth more and more, uncontrollably. Forget about the cannon. If that spear fell here, hundreds of thousands of innocent lives would be lost, among which there was certainly no shortage of small children and newborns. With the sky rumbling with black flames and the wall beneath her feet collapsing, Nangong Lingxin hollered from the bottom of her lungs as she expended every point of mana and used every bit of her magic power to resist at least a little longer. 2 or 3 seconds later, the barrier finally crumbled and she received a strong backlash that sent her flying backwards. The last thing Nangong Lingxin felt before she fell unconscious was a pair of strong arms around her and, cushioning several explosions as at least a dozen buildings were destroyed by their bodies flying backwards. Shangguan Bingshui had no time to worry about anything. She stretched both hands skyward and using what little mana she had left raised a large wall of ice. Mana drive. She shouted and suddenly her mana was fully recovered as the earring Bai Zemin had given her, released a faint but beautiful silver radiance. Although that mana was only temporary and was quickly being burned away, Shangguan Bingshui couldn't be more grateful as it was precisely that mana what supported her long enough until the magic power of the black flame spear disappeared along with the skill itself. At the same time, as she sighed in relief, she felt a pair of gentle arms holding her body on the verge of collapse, followed by the soft voice of the one who was probably her most loved one. "Are you okay?" Shangguan Bingshui nodded at her mother's question, and with her support slowly sat up, gasping for air. Her face was so white that even her pink lips had been affected. It was as if all blood had been drained from her body. About 30 seconds later, the two exhausted women raised their heads to see Bai Zemin enveloped in a halo of golden light bringing the unconscious body of Nangong Lingxin in his arms. "Are you all right?" Shangguan Bingshui asked, noticing that there was a large gash on his forehead with a line of blood trickling down his face. Bai Zemin looked off into the horizon with an unreadable expression on his face, and after several seconds nodded slowly as he said softly, "I'm fine." He looked at her and asked, "You okay?" Shangguan Bingshui nodded, "I will not die, but I will probably need some time to fully recover." Bai Zemin nodded. He was in the same situation, his injuries were not small. Suddenly, both Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bingshui were drawn to the sound of sobbing, and both were speechless as they watched Shangguan Xinyue wiping away non-existent tears. "My heart feels cold and desolate. My daughter, whom I raised with great care and effort, doesn't even care about my well-being." She clutched at her heart using her healthy arm while the other remained still at her side and said with false sadness, "Of course, you will always be replaced by a man. That's life after all. I'm just an old single woman after all. Mom, you..." Shangguan Bingshui really didn't know what to make of her mother. She could even joke at this moment. "Humph. I've decided, I'll steal him from you." Shangguan Xinyue suddenly took a step forward and pressed her petite body to Bai Zemin's as she hugged him and looked at her daughter with a challenging expression. "I don't care any more about you." Shangguan Bingshui rolled her eyes, and instead of replying she took out a mana recovery potion, from which she began to drink with delight and pleasure. Bai Zemin looked at the beautiful woman whose body was small but whose age was old enough to be his mother even, though she appeared to be younger than him, and asked in a serious voice, "Aunt, are you all right?" Shangguan Xinyue only reached halfway up Bai Zemin's chest, so she had to raise her head to look at him. When she met his serious expression, Shangguan Xinyue muttered something before stepping back. "You're not funny." Then, she frowned with a now serious expression on her face, and as she raised her face towards the horizon, she asked in a low voice, "Little king, what will you do now?" That alligator ran away. Chapter 973 Feng Tianwu collapses. "Little king, what will you do now?" That alligator ran away. Bai Zemin did not immediately respond to Shangguan Xinyue's question, but instead stared at the horizon towards where Tao Ji had fled with an indifferent expression on his face. This had been Bai Zemin's most difficult battle to date, and although in theory it could be considered a battle won as the enemy was forced to flee like a homeless dog, he did not see it that way. Tao Ji was strong, very strong. Frighteningly strong, in fact. His magical power was so high that he even surpassed Bai Zemin using overlap regeneration under the boost of soul manipulation. In fact, Tao Ji was so powerful that even with the union of Bai Zemin, Shangguan Bingshui, and Shangguan Xinyue, he not only managed to break out alive but had also managed to damage all three of them, enough to send them to bed for a whole week if they wanted to make a full recovery. Bai Zemin used practically everything he had and even used the enemy's cosmic particle cannon to his advantage. He gave everything of himself, Shangguan Bing Shui gave everything of herself, Shangguan Xinyue gave everything of herself, and yet, Tao Ji managed to escape alive. Bai Zemin still did not understand how it was possible that his enemy could have survived the power of his blazing blood punishment. Even if Bai Zemin had restrained himself when he launched it, since he didn't want to destroy his world, killing everyone and dying in the process, he was sure that the power behind that attack was terrifying enough to kill almost anything below level 290. In fact, the blazing blood punishment he cast was so powerful that the shockwave injured him as well as the two women beside him, even though Shangguan Bing Shui and Shangguan Xinyue had contained most of the power of the skill within the fortified ice creation. Of course, Bai Zemin had no way of knowing that Tao Ji should be dead, and the only reason he survived was because he was so lucky that it was simply hard to believe. He simulated the battle several times in his head, and found that the only way he could have won and killed Tao Ji was practically impossible to accomplish in the first go. This was because in order to have any chance of defeating such an opponent, Bai Zemin needed to use soul manipulation to boost magic break to a higher stage. However, Bai Zemin did not know that his enemy was a mage and therefore could not simply take the risk of evolving magic break. If the enemy turned out to be a warrior, that skill would be as good as useless on the battlefield. The fact that Tao Ji was able to flee alive was certainly a big problem, but Bai Zemin also felt a bit of relief. At the end of the day, his injuries were not light, and Shangguan Bing Shui could no longer rely on skills, so she could only use physical attacks. As for Shangguan Xinyue, she still had mana to spare as she hadn't consumed that much, but she was certainly injured enough that she couldn't give her 100% in combat. It was a pity, and it was certainly a problem. But considering that Tao Ji was badly injured, there probably wouldn't be any problem soon. Besides, Bai Zemin knew instinctively that it wouldn't be long before the two of them would meet again to bring this unfinished episode to a complete closure. Shangguan Xinyue and Shangguan Bing Shui looked at him worriedly, seeing his serious expression as he said nothing, till he finally broke the silence. For now, let's take care of what we have on hand. Bai Zemin looked off into the distance, into the sea of golden flames, and his blood-red eyes met with a bright pair of golden eyes staring back at him. So much destruction, so much danger. But the 5 minutes limit Feng Tianwu had set for him earlier had not yet passed. These flames. Shangguan Bing Shui seemed to realize something when she saw Bai Zemin looking off into the distance. Yeah, it's Feng Tianwu. Bai Zemin nodded and put Nangong Lingxin down gently on the ground. Thanks to the fact that the girl's injuries were not really life-threatening, he did not have to exert much effort to give her a potion to drink to boost her recovery speed by 20%. Seeing Bai Zemin walk towards the center of the sea of golden flames, Shangguan Bing Shui simply closed her eyes and tried to recover as quickly as possible. Hey, Bing Shui. Shangguan Xinyue sat down next to her daughter and said in a low voice, "Don't you think that Tianwu girl looks at our little king with peculiar eyes? I've been thinking about it for a while, but there are even rumors about those too." Actually, there were not a few people who said that Bai Zemin and Feng Tianwu shared some kind of past. Even if the people who knew about the background between the two did not divulge the truth for whatever reasons, it was not hard to tell that something was not right when Feng Tianwu seemed to pay special attention to him whenever he appeared, while he subconsciously kept his distance. Shangguan Bing Shui had a theory about it, but she wasn't sure either and didn't feel it was her place to ask about it, therefore, she always kept her thoughts to herself. "Mom, don't be a gossip." But. Shangguan Xinyue immediately began to play bratty. On the other hand, Bai Zemin approached Feng Tianwu and calmly said, "Feng Tianwu, you can deactivate your skill now. The enemies we had to defeat were defeated, and the ones that have to be defeated will fall soon." Feng Tianwu was looking at the ground, but when she heard his voice she raised her head again to look at him. Her appearance was not completely human, but this did not mean that her current state was ugly, not at all. She was an exotic beauty, different from normal, but beauty nonetheless. She looked at his pale face and the blood running from his forehead before asking in a weak voice, "We won?" "We did." Xietain nodded and said calmly, "Thanks to you this time. Otherwise I'm afraid it would have been troublesome." "I wonder about that." Feng Tianwu looked beyond him, towards the now practically completely collapsed southern wall of the base, and said in an unreadable tone of voice, "Even if I did nothing, those two women would have arrived a few minutes later, and with the two of them here victory would have been only a matter of time, wouldn't it?" Xietain said nothing at first. What she was saying was true after all. However, it was undeniable that this victory was thanks to the woman in front of him, and whatever happened in the past was just that, past. As a leader, Xietain had the obligation to be fair to his people, and that was exactly what he planned to do. "We don't need to assume something that didn't happen. It is undeniable that the enemies fell mainly thanks to you," he said in a serious voice, before assuring her, "You will be rewarded accordingly. That's how things work in our faction. If I remember correctly, you have to be a level 3 noble now? I will upgrade your status to a level 2 noble and you will begin to receive the benefits you are entitled to. Oh, I also plan to start forming approximately 2 more legions. You will have priority in the leadership of one of them." Those soul evolvers nearby looked at Feng Tianwu with an envious look when they heard Xietan's promise. After all, there were only 2 rank 2 nobles in the entire faction, which were namely Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Ijuan. Moreover, being the highest commander of a legion was basically everyone's dream. Being the top commander of a legion would immediately raise one's speaking rights and prestige to the clouds, and, beyond, even the main leader, Xietain, listened to them and appreciated their opinions greatly. However, none of those present believed that Feng Tianwu did not deserve such rewards. Not when she had annihilated the enemy forces at the faction's worst moment. Rewards. Feng Tianwu lowered her head and muttered to herself before nodding, "Of course." Xietain frowned when he noticed that she didn't seem satisfied. If Feng Tianwu was excited he would understand, and actually that would be the natural reaction. He would even understand if she simply nodded indifferently. However, she seemed dissatisfied, and not because of the rewards per se, leaving him perplexed. Just as he was about to tell her that if she had something she wanted he would help her get it as long as it was within his ability and not something too crazy, the golden flames simply disappeared without a trace and Feng Tianwu's appearance returned to normal. Even her red robe was there, even though it seemed to have turned to ashes before. However, before anyone could say or even think anything, Feng Tianwu's eyes rolled to the back of her head at the same time as her eyelids closed. Xietan's expression changed abruptly, and when he saw her weak body falling, he hurriedly moved forward to avoid the collapse. However, Xietain soon realized a giant problem, and while ignoring the gasps of surprise and concern around him, he could not help but feel grateful to the fact that his body's pain sensors were deactivated. With Feng Tianwu in his arms, Xietain felt his entire armor overheat to the point where he began to sweat. Right away, the durability of all his equipment began to plummet, especially that of his gloves, which in a matter of blinks began to melt. When he looked at the increasingly red skin on Feng Tianwu's face, he finally understood a little more the reason why she hadn't made use of that fire domain before, or even mentioned about it. "Kong Lan." Xietain bellowed in a deep voice as the frown on his face became more and more pronounced. Kong Lan hurriedly advanced and without waiting for orders pointed her magic staff at Feng Tianwu in his arms. Mystic Healing. Mystic Healing was the strongest healing skill Kong Lan had at the moment. It was a 3rd order level 5 skill that not only speeded up natural recovery by 300% but also empowered the target with 700 health points for 20 minutes. The skill could even grow small body parts such as fingers and was also 200% more effective when treating fatal wounds or diseases. It was a skill that Kong Lan had paid a great price for. She had been saving up from her monthly salary to buy high-quality soul stones from some fellow soul evolvers, and spent entire nights hunting alone to get the materials needed to level it up. Furthermore, the fact that Kong Lan was considered a genius when it came to magic only below 3 or 4 people in the entire faction certainly was demonstrated when the effect of mystic healing, which was based on the magic stat and magic power of the user, turned out to be a lot stronger than it would normally be in the hands of any other healer. Therefore, she was very proud and had full confidence in mystic healing. It was precisely this skill that brought Kai Jingyi and Shinmei back from the brink of death in just 2 days of time. Kong Lan did not believe that there was anything or anyone in this world that her skill could not handle, as a single use always showed improvement regardless of how bad the other party's condition was. But there were always exceptions in the vast universe, and Kong Lan was, after all, very young. Kong Lan felt her mana decrease and saw with her own eyes as a silver beam of light shot out from the tip of her magic staff and went into Feng Tianwu's body. However, even after several seconds, not only was there no improvement, but everyone could see at a glance how the skin of the girl in Bai Zemin's arms became redder and redder. Chapter 974, Soul Devoured by Flames. Seeing that mystic healing had little if any effect on Feng Tianwu, Kong Lan's expression changed slightly, and she finally realized that this might be a problem beyond what she could handle. However, she did not give up just because one attempt of so many turned out to be unsuccessful. I'll try again, Kong Lan said, and gritted her teeth as she activated mystic healing for the second time. One of the qualities of mystic healing was that it had no cooldown time, but the mana cost for each activation on the same target would just keep increasing more and more, resetting to normal consumption only after 24 hours elapsed following the first use on the target to be healed. In addition, the health boost only worked once every 24 hours on the same target, so it was not possible to abuse it either. Even then, however, being able to activate the skill as many times as her mana would allow was certainly amazing. It was not for nothing that Kong Lan was the most powerful healer in the entire faction, despite the fact that the number of healers was not small at present. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Silver Light Ray. After Silver Light Ray activated under Kong Lan's magic power and covered Feng Tianwu's figure, before disappearing into her body. After several practically overlapping activations, with no interruptions in between, a slight improvement could be seen on Feng Tianwu's skin, and Bai Zemin could feel the temperature of her body drop a little. Unfortunately, all these improvements were insignificant, and not even 20 seconds passed before she returned to her previous condition and subsequently continued getting worse. This is... Kong Lan lowered her hands powerlessly as she looked at the unconscious Feng Tianwu with an expression of shock and disbelief. Bai Zemin's expression was serious, and after telling Kong Lan not to worry too much, he frowned tightly as he realized that the situation was bad, very bad. Xia, come here. He turned his face and called out. Xia had been hiding behind several soul evolvers, but upon hearing Bai Zemin's call she couldn't help but grimace. Even so, she obediently stepped out and walked over. Leader, do I really have to? She asked unenthusiastically. Just one try. If after one try it doesn't work, then you don't have to do it again. Can you help me with that? Bai Zemin said in a deep voice. After a brief moment of silence, Xia sighed heavily, and without saying anything she pointed her wand at Feng Tianwu while muttering to herself, this is going to be painful. It's really gonna sting. I know. It's definitely going to hurt a hell of a lot. Despite her complaints, Xia used healing of the cursed on Feng Tianwu. The skill had barely been activated when everyone immediately saw Feng Tianwu's skin turning significantly less red in an instant, and the frown on her face eased a little. However, Xia's cry of pain and wailing made it clear to everyone that Feng Tianwu was not writhing at this moment just because she was unable to do so. The skill healing of the cursed of Xia might not be as strong or handy as Kong Lan's mystic healing skill. However, this depended a lot on who the target to be healed was. When it came to high-level soul evolvers with a lot of pure soul power, Xiaoya's healing of the cursed skill was undoubtedly much more powerful than Kong Lan's skill. After all, healing of the cursed was a skill that healed by a fixed percentage. The only drawback was that the more she used that skill, the more pain Xiaoya would experience. Therefore, she preferred not to use such a skill unless there really was no other choice. Seeing Feng Tianwu improve, Bai Zemin's eyes lit up slightly for a moment before his expression sank once again. It's not good. Even though she improved, her condition is still decaying and will soon return to the previous point, he said in a serious voice as he felt the temperature of the body in his arms going up again. Just at that moment, a person approached from a distance, and when Bai Zemin saw this person his mood immediately underwent a tremendous change. Especially when he saw what this person was dragging. Everyone made way as they saw Evangeline approaching. The faction members opened up like waves opening up at Mose's power, and when she arrived in front of Bai Zemin, she paused for a moment to look at Feng Tianwu indifferently, ignoring her and her condition in a matter of breaths. She put some strength into her arm and pulled hard on the mutant beast tendon she was dragging. With 3 thudding noises, 3 bodies fell in front of Bai Zemin. It took me a while to find them, but I managed somehow, Evangeline said casually before clarifying, they were fleeing, just like you said. Of course. Bai Zemin looked at 2 of the unconscious figures and felt a surge of rage that if not for him restraining it, it would have ended his sanity. His voice was deathly cold as he slowly said, they are both low-life trash. You would expect nothing less from these 2. Right, the existences in front of Bai Zemin were none other than Liangpeng and the goblin leader whose name Bai Zemin had forgotten. As for the third one, he ignored him. He was a Triton man, and Bai Zemin assumed that he was probably part of the Third East Sea Prince's faction, but was left behind and fled at the slightest sign of trouble. You did a good job, Evangeline. Bai Zemin nodded toward her before standing up with Feng Tianwu in his arms. Help me keep an eye on them. But don't kill them. Evangeline simply nodded indifferently before turning around and walking back to the enemy base, a base that would soon fall into the hands of their transcendent faction. Bai Zemin took a deep breath, not to get carried away by emotions, but with nearly 1/5 of his rationality out of the game it wasn't a simple feat. Especially considering that in front of him were the 2 major causes behind Zhongda's death. I'll take my time with you. Easy and slowly, he thought to himself before shouting loudly, Blood Spear Legion, get ready to take over the enemy base. We do not accept surrender from anyone. Soldier or soul evolver, human or non-human. Except for normal survivors who did not oppose us, don't leave anyone alive. They had been at war for 2 whole months against these enemies. No, those 2 months was only the amount of time Bai Zemin had joined the battle. They had been at war for about half a year against these enemies. During all that time, they were forced to stay holed up in a base, the only fort their faction could build in Inner Mongolia. Many allies died, and many families were broken. During this last half-month in particular, they had not even been able to close their eyes once. As they looked at the bodies of their comrades bleeding out next to them, Bai Zemin's words finally became the spark that was needed for large amounts of gunpowder restrained in their hearts to explode uncontrollably. Kill them all. Don't let those bastards get away. They've been abusing their numbers all this time. It's time they got a taste of their own medicine now that they are fewer in number. Avenge our fallen comrades. Avenge all the women who were traded to the goblins. Kill, kill. Murderous intent filled the air as the previously exhausted and drained soul evolvers burst out with newfound energy. The ground shook under the powerful stomps of each soul evolver not wanting to be late to the base, similar to a legendary beast taking its first step towards the destruction of its enemies. No one reneged against Bai Zemin's words this time. They all needed to release the frustration and fear they had been accumulating during this past half-month, especially during the past few days with no apparent end as they were surrounded by endless enemies. Fu Xiafeng, Kong Lan, Kai Jingyi, Nangong Yi, Luoning. Bai Zemin named several people, and as he watched his troops jumping over the fallen wall or smashing the gate, before starting the massacre he said in a deep voice, make sure our people do not make any crime. If anyone tries to rape, kill them. If anyone tries to kill innocent survivors, then break their legs and apprehend them. Roger. They all nodded and immediately disappeared, outpacing the speed of the subordinate soul evolvers by far. Some rules were not allowed to break, not even Xietain had the right to do that, not to mention others. Collector's Pocket World. 2 hours had passed in the outside world and the bloodbath still continued. Xietain did not stop his troops and let them choose how to kill the enemies, even if this was something cruel, and gave him a bad name in the future. Shangguan Xingyue and Xia were present, and both women had been greatly shocked when Xietain took them to the Collector's Pocket World for the first time. Since he trusted Xia because she had proven her loyalty to him and now was even his loyal follower, he had no problem with showing her this great secret. As for Shangguan Xingyue, Xietain did not trust her specifically, but he trusted Shangguan Bingshui and did not believe that Shangguan Xingyue would ever do anything to hurt her daughter or near and dear ones. At this time, Shangguan Xingyue and Shangguan Bingshui were resting. Both of them were taking full advantage of the time difference within this world to recover in less time from the outside world. As for Xietain and Xia, more than 50 kilometers away from the place where Xietain was building his and his people's shelter. Thank God the treasures can't be destroyed, or else this bed would have turned to ashes by now. Xietain sighed as he looked ahead. In his treasure bed, Feng Tianwu lay with her eyes closed and without movement except for the slight rise and fall of her chest with each breath. In fact, all the grass in the surrounding area had died and the trees were beginning to wither. At this rate, it would be a matter of time before this place would become a sea of flames if Feng Tianwu's body temperature continued to rise uncontrollably. Leader, do I really have to? Xia sighed. At least for now. Xietain nodded firmly. Okay. Feng Tianwu's skin was still so red that it was scary, but thanks to Xia, it hadn't worsened to a great extent. Even so, using healing of the cursed was far from an optimal solution, as the rate at which Feng Tianwu was getting worse was higher in comparison. After a minute of silence, Xietain looked at the beautiful porcelain doll sitting in a wheelchair and asked in a low voice, Callie, can you see anything? This person's soul is being consumed, Callie said in an emotionless voice as she kept her face in Feng Tianwu's direction. Her soul is being consumed? Xietain was very astonished and quickly asked, what do you mean by that? Just as it sounds. Callie calmly replied. This woman, Feng Tianwu, is being consumed from the inside. Her soul is getting overheated, probably a rebound from the skill you told me she used during the war. This? Xietain was shocked as he stared at the woman on the bed intently. Why the hell did she use that skill then? Probably because she's stupid? Xia shrugged her shoulders, but when she was glared at by Xietain, she quickly shut her mouth and looked away. Xietain frowned tightly. He didn't believe that Feng Tianwu didn't know the consequences of using such a strong skill. The soul record always made it clear when there were benefits and punishments in the records of each skill. But why did she use that domain? Even though he had asked for her help, she didn't have to go this far, had she? Isn't there some way to help her? Xietain asked in a deep voice. Feng Tianwu was a powerful soul evolver, a great asset to his faction. She was an undeniable genius, and if possible Xietain would rather not lose such a genius so early when there were so many things to do and so many wars to fight. Well, I'm not a doctor, but... Callie hesitated before slowly saying, since her soul is burning due to high temperatures, wouldn't it help to cool it with something? Cool it with something. Xietain smiled bitterly and shook his head. Souls were mysterious things that no one dared to play with. A single wrong move could result in irreparable damage or even death. How was he supposed to know how to cool Feng Tianwu's soul? He couldn't even touch her soul at all, or at least reach it. Chapter 975 Merciless. Xietain could do nothing about Feng Tianwu's situation. Even with Callie pointing out what the problem was, he had no way of reaching the affected soul to cool it as Callie had suggested. Furthermore, Xietain knew that this cooling was not as simple as putting some ice on a burn, but probably had to be done with a special skill or even a treasure. Unfortunately, Xietain did not have or know anyone with the ability to do such a thing. Therefore, at least temporarily, he could only put this matter aside. Of course, he would only partially set it aside and stay alert and attentive in search of anything that might help to bring Feng Tianwu out of her current condition. She had done a lot for the faction, and as leader of that faction, it was Xietan's duty to respond back to his subordinates. Immediately after leaving the collector's pocket world without even bothering to stay to recover from his wounds, Xietain headed for a place in the open field within the walls. In this place relatively far away from everything, Evangeline was waiting for him, and when Xietain arrived his eyes immediately focused on the three figures, lying on the ground passed out. "Looks like you had some fun with them," Xietain commented. "Your words could be misunderstood, so stop saying it." "Thank you." Surprisingly, Evangeline played a little joke with him. "That's new." Xietain looked at her with a raised eyebrow. Evangeline said nothing more, but simply turned to leave. However, she had only taken a few steps when Xietan's next words made her stop. "After we properly finish with all this problem, we will head for Russia. We will take their territory and kill whoever we have to kill. Be it saint or be it demon." Evangeline stood silently for about 5 seconds before she continued her steps without another word. Xietain watched as her blonde hair tied in a ponytail swayed with each step she took until she disappeared from his line of sight before finally turning his eyes to two of the three fainting figures a meter in front of him. He directly ignored the male Triton. His blood-red eyes seemed to turn even redder as his stare fell on the bodies of Liangpeng and Crare. All the rage he had been holding back as much as possible burst out, and with what little sanity he had left Xietain grabbed the third-order mutant beast tendon that tied the three stalks together and returned to the collector's pocket world. There was nothing but trees and green grass under the vast blue sky. This was the place where Xietain had last been before returning to the outside world. He had moved far away from the house and the place where Feng Tianwu was lying unconscious exactly because he had already planned his next move. If possible, Xietain did not want anyone to see what he was going to do. Looking at the three unconscious existences, Xietain untied them and put away the incredibly tough tendon. Then, he looked at the male Triton and without warning kicked him in the stomach. Boom! The male Triton flew backwards and his body rolled along the ground for over 200 meters before crashing into a giant tree. Ugh! The merfolk frowned with a pained expression on his face as he slowly got to his feet. However, his movements froze when he noticed a shadow towering over him, and when he raised his head he found a human male surrounded by a golden light staring at him coldly with red eyes like those of a demon. It was then that the merfolk remembered that he had been captured by a human after a short battle in which he received a cut with a knife filled with a strange poison that left him paralyzed. At this critical juncture where his life was at stake, the Triton opened his mouth wide and the mana in his body trembled at the imminent activation of a powerful, magical skill. Unfortunately, Xietain had no intention of spending his time on an enemy he didn't care about. No, this enemy was very important to him but in a very different way. The effect of soul manipulation was still active, and Xietain didn't want to risk too much knowing that his injuries were not light. Boom! With a mighty punch wrapped in a blood gauntlet, the head of the Triton exploded into a bloody pile of pulp with skull splinters flying everywhere and brain matter sticking to pieces of wood that came off the tree on the verge of collapsing. Xietain pulled back his fist and kept the corpse in his storage ring before turning and walking back to Liangpeng and Crare. For more to go. He only needed to kill 4 more third-order enemies to complete the requirement of 100. And considering that Xietain had his next 2 victims right in front of him, it was not wrong to say that he only needed 2 more to finish. Xietain stared at the 2 in silence. He glared at them both as if he wanted to etch their appearances firmly into his soul before doing what he was about to do. There were practically no wounds on them. The most striking thing would be the cut near their necks. Evangeline had certainly used a powerful skill to disable third-order soul evolvers. But Xietain wasn't too surprised. She was Evangeline after all. After about 5 minutes, he opened his mouth and said indifferently, "If you two want to keep playing asleep, then let me see how much you can keep pretending, you fucking retards." With a thought, Xietain replaced his strength with magic, and with his magic power now soaring into the clouds, activated gravity manipulation X60 around the duo. Bang! The ground caved in and a large crater formed. Rumble. The surrounding atmosphere rumbled and part of the sky seemed to be about to fall. Ack! Ugh! 2 loud groans were almost completely silenced by the loud noise of nature crying out at the gravitational surge in the area. The pain that Liangpeng and goblin leader Crare were experiencing was not small, considering that the gravity of the collector's pocket world was higher than the Earth's gravity. Xietain stopped the effect of his skill as he saw the two of them squirming like worms and casually kicked their legs without using too much force. "Get up you two, now." Liangpeng and Crare looked into each other's eyes, both noticing the fear in the other's eyes. The two of them had seen what Xietain was capable of. He could kill third-order soul evolvers as if shooting ducks with a battle tank. It was precisely because of this, and because they had seen how Xietain could take on the mysterious figure that seemed to be the true backing of the third Prince Xian, that Liangpeng and Crare decided to flee as soon as they had the chance to do it. But what neither of them expected was that this opportunity had actually been presented by the enemy on purpose. The two of them had not gotten too far before they had to face the terrifying golden-haired assassin, who in a very short time reduced them as if they were infants. Liangpeng was the first to stand up, albeit with shaky movements. Messy beard, pale face, small pupils, messed up hair, and finally, trembling voice. "Be Xietain. You. Why you, what do you want to do?" Xietain looked at this man who before the apocalypse was in charge of the security of the university he attended and said nothing for a few seconds. "Liangpeng, are you scared? You're trembling." That's right, this former ally of his was scared out of his mind. From his appearance to his eyes and voice, all of these characteristics were a sign of someone scared of something. Liangpeng said nothing but gulped as he looked around the surroundings for a place to flee to. Little did he know that there was no place to flee to in this world. All connection to the outside world existed by and for Xietan's will. Xietain turned his attention to the goblin leader, whose name he did not remember, but he did remember his appearance and general characteristics. Crare was barely getting to his feet when he felt an overwhelming surge of pain, and as he looked down he couldn't help but get terrified. "Boom! Crare screamed. No, he howled like a wounded beast as his left leg from the knee down exploded into a pile of bloody mist. Liangpeng subconsciously took several steps back with an even paler face as his teeth began to clack steadily. As Crare rolled on the ground in pain and clutched at the upper half of his leg, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets as they were so wide. His expression was fierce, not of anger, but of terror and pain as he stared at the rest of it. "I told you I never wanted to see your fucking face again, and then I let you go. But I see now I made a big mistake by thinking that you, shitty creatures, could ever come to understand the language of us intelligent beings." Xietain said in a cold voice. His mana burst outward and his magic power boosted the terror of blood manipulation, and with a thunderous explosion, the upper half of the goblin leader's left leg turned into a bloody mist just as the lower half had done seconds before. "I did it. I fucking did it. I disappeared from your territory just how you asked." Crare roared in pain as he writhed with his face practically deformed as a result of the pain he was feeling. Xietain had enhanced the goblin leader's entire body's pain sensors using blood manipulation, so the pain Crare was feeling was simply immense, to the point of driving him to the brink of insanity. "I left the place. I ran up north and never bothered you again." Xietan's expression remained impassive, and with a single thought on his part, nearly 6,000 magic points accompanied blood manipulation towards the enemy's lower right leg. Boom. "When I said leave my territory, I meant my homeland, you retarded piece of shit." Xietain muttered as Crare fell on his back with a high-pitched howl that surely damaged his vocal cords. After the lower right leg followed the upper right leg, then it was the fingers of the left hand followed by the fingers of the right hand. A minute later Crer's left forearm was gone, and another minute later the right forearm experienced the same fate. Crer was no longer shrieking, but was currently laughing out loud with wide eyes and a twisted expression on his face. The tears that fell in quantities from his wide-open eyes fused with green mucus, and a torrent of slime ran from his mouth. Pain could really drive someone crazy, soul evolver or not. Liang Peng knew that if he stood there his fate wasn't going to be much better, and when he looked at his ally's miserable condition he immediately knew he didn't want to experience the same destiny. Every muscle in his body swelled and his size grew to twice its normal size. With a heavy stomp, the ground beneath his feet sank ponderously, and his figure shot off into the distance like a cannonball, piercing through two giant trees in the process, but not caring about anything but running away. Fight? As if. Liang Peng was a third-order soul evolver of level 128, powerful in his own right and with qualifications to be proud of. However, he still vividly remembered what Bai Zemin was capable of doing with his monstrous power while they were still in college. If it wasn't possible before, then Liang Peng naturally wasn't stupid enough to want to fight now after seeing how strong the same Bai Zemin had grown. The intention was right, but the result wouldn't necessarily show a reward. Swoosh. Swoosh. Feeling two swift gusts of wind approaching, Liang Peng was quick to realize that he needed to do something before it was too late, and despite not having his main weapon present, he certainly didn't give up in the face of adversity. Beast Fist. With a roar as fierce as his expression, Liang Peng abruptly turned around and slammed his two fists forward without holding back at all. Bang! 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 The weight of his fists was such that every inch they advanced caused the air to blast and disturbed the surrounding atmosphere. Swoosh! Swoosh! The two blood chains with spear-like pointed ends coiled like snakes in the air, easily avoiding Liang Peng's predictable attack and fiercely hitting both his left and right shoulder. Boom! Boom! Bai Zemin, you son of a bitch! Liang Peng cursed in the midst of the pain he felt. His body was sent flying and two streams of blood spurted out from his shoulders. Bang! A crater over 30 meters in diameter formed on the ground as Liang Peng's body was ferociously pinned by the two chains with pointed ends that had pierced his tough skin from side to side, seemingly ignoring the high defense that his silver skin skill granted him. As he twisted and activated skills in not too successful attempts to escape, Liang Peng saw something flying towards him, and when he focused his eyes on the sky, his pupils trembled slightly. With a thud, Goblin leader Crer's head fell right next to him. The expression on Crer's face had become so twisted that even Liang Peng would not be able to recognize him if not for the fact that he knew it was Crer, and judging by the look in his eyes it was clear that his now former ally had died a gruesome death. Liang Peng was sure that Bai Zemin had not decapitated him, but that this head was probably the only thing left of Crer. Chapter 976, No More Red, Midnight Black Again. /N. This chapter is a bit cruel and bloody. Read at your own will. The sight of the bloodied head with a distorted expression shaped before Crer's death, coupled with the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer, as well as the fact that no matter how hard he tried, he simply could not break free of the blood chains restraining him, caused Liang Peng to start roaring and cursing as he writhed ferociously. Bai Zemin, let me stand up if you're a man. Are you listening to me, you little bitch? Right. If I remember correctly, when we were stuck in the university you were looking for your family, weren't you? I hope you failed miserably. Ha 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 ha. Just imagining your expression makes me feel fucking happy. Bai Zemin listened as Liang Peng turned all his fear into anger, and as he reached his side came to a pause. He towered high above his once ally and currently enemy, who was glaring at him with eyes filled with fury. Fury that failed to mask very well the terror that flashed deep within Liang Peng's pupils. Liang Peng's words were becoming more and more outrageous, and insulting Bai Zemin was the healthiest thing he did as his spit flew everywhere with each of his curses. However, much to Bai Zemin's surprise, he did not get angry. Regardless of whether Liangpeng cursed his little sister, regardless of whether he wished for his mother's death, and regardless of whether he mocked his father's apparent inability to protect his son, Bai Zemin did not get angry. No. After thinking about it for a moment, Bai Zemin realized that it wasn't about him not getting angry. It was something completely different, something way more terrifying that was hidden beneath his deathly cold expression. The anger Bai Zemin felt had reached a point so high that it would probably not continue to grow by mere words. Not for nothing are 2 triggers of my Blood Berserker's Wrath skill active, I guess. Bai Zemin reasoned indifferently. A few minutes later, Liangpeng finally seemed to get tired, or perhaps he simply realized that Bai Zemin wasn't going to give him a quick death in a fit of rage, no matter how much he verbally assaulted him. Staring at him panting, Bai Zemin asked from a higher position, "Last words?" Hearing this, despite feeling reluctance and fear, what Liangpeng felt most was relief. He thought that his words may have had some effect after all, and now at least he would at least be granted a quick death. With a cocky smile on his bearded face, he said while licking his lips, "Yeah, I really regret not giving that little slut Shangguan Bingshui a nice fuck. I always wanted to put her little body under mine and listen to her little puppy whimpers." Saying that, Bai Zemin looked on with an indifferent expression as Liangpeng moved his waist up and down as if simulating something obvious. "I see." Bai Zemin nodded, and under Liangpeng's confused eyes he squatted down close to his head. "Well, although I doubt whether it's your past or your current self would have had such an opportunity, it's a pity that you have to die with regrets, don't you think? I guess what they say about living like it's the last minute isn't too wrong after all." The last words were muttered under his breath as Bai Zemin extended his right hand at lightning speed forward. Bang! Ugh! The sound of bones breaking apart and turning into dust, followed by a loud, barely comprehensible groan, filled the surroundings. Liangpeng's eyes widened and he couldn't stop a bunch of tears from streaming down his face as his pupils trembled. He lowered his eyes and noticed, to his horror, that his jaw was now hanging and he could no longer move his mouth at all. Bai Zemin took one of Liangpeng's teeth between his index finger and thumb and with a casual tug pulled it out by the root, provoking another groan from him. However, Liangpeng's nightmare had only just begun. As Bai Zemin gashed his left palm using Liangpeng's tooth and his blood twisted strangely, he said in a flat voice, "You know, it turns out that when I was little, and even now whatever, I was never good at peeling fruits or vegetables. It's quite strange if you think about it a bit. My current self can work on leather and mutant beast pelts, but I can't peel an apple without losing half a fruit in the process." Under Liangpeng's wide eyes, the blood that had flowed out from the wound Bai Zemin had self-inflicted floated on his palm with a scab of dried blood sealing the wound and preventing the continuous blood flow. Under the care of the skill blood manipulation and over 400 mana points, a beautiful crimson-colored knife with several elegant endings fell onto his palm. Ah! Speaking about apples. Bai Zemin reached out his left hand and took the tongue of Liangpeng between his fingers. Swoosh! Woo! Bai Zemin ignored Liangpeng's high-pitched whine and made smaller blood chains break off from the two that restrained the latter on the ground. As the blood chains bound Liangpeng's body and prevented him from continuing to writhe uncontrollably from the pain and horror, Bai Zemin forced half of the severed tongue back into his mouth and with a loud smack sent it down the throat of an increasingly terrified Liangpeng. Speaking of apples, he repeated and grabbed Liangpeng's right arm. After breaking the bond between the bones that joined the two parts with a tight squeeze that drew another unrecognizable yelp, Bai Zemin continued, "Several months ago, I promised to a certain emperor that the next time we meet I would peel his skin as if it were the peel of an apple. But, as I mentioned before, I'm not very good with knives and fruits. So, it would be better if I practice a little, don't you think? We don't want to disappoint a great emperor after all." This time Liangpeng finally realized how bad a situation he had fallen into. No, he already knew that his situation wasn't good, but he didn't expect something like this. With his jaw broken and his tongue cut off, Liang Peng made intangible sounds as he shook his head desperately. Bai Zemin looked at his pleading and fear-filled expression as if he did not understand while saying in a perplexed voice, "Why are you so scared? The young women of different ages that you deprived of their destiny by handing them over to the goblins experienced something similar and even worse, you know? Don't worry, even though it doesn't look like it, this knife is probably as sharp as a rank 1 dagger. But come to think of it, you probably have a passive to enhance the toughness of your skin, so you're likely to feel a little more pain." "Sorry, man." Seeing the knife slowly approaching his hand, Liang Peng howled and shrieked with snot, drool, and tears making his face an even bigger mess. "Don't get freaked out, Liang Peng. I'll make sure not to kill you." Bai Zemin carefully ran the knife barely grazing the skin of Liang Peng's index finger, and as the skin peeled off and revealed the red flesh below, he said in a cruel voice, "I'll let you experience every second. Even fainting won't be allowed." Time inside the collector's pocket world ran 10 times faster than in the outside world. When 1 hour in the outside world was gone, inside the collector's pocket world 10 had passed. The collector's pocket world was, as the name of the skill of the collector's pocket watch suggested, as big as an entire world. As to how big that world was, Bai Zemin certainly didn't know since he had never explored it fully, and it was highly improbable that he would ever in the short term do so since he didn't have that much free time. In a certain part of said world that had once been silent, the howls and fierce high-pitched squeals of what sounded like a live pig being thrown into a tub of boiling water resounded continuously and without pause for 10 whole hours. 10 hours later, Bai Zemin looked at the scene in front of him with a cold expression. "Really? How can I be so bad at this knife and apple thing?" he muttered to himself as he swiped the back of his bloody hand across his face to wipe away a drop of blood, instead causing part of his left cheek to be covered in red at his negligent movement. There were several shreds tossed casually to the side. Some shreds were thin and long, others were thick and short, and there were more shreds that could not be considered shreds as they were as small as the size of a fingernail, a result of a failed cut. Liang Peng was alive. Bai Zemin had made sure of it. Not only was he alive, but he was also conscious. He had been for the longest and cruelest 10 hours of his life. Bai Zemin made sure to use blood manipulation to wake him up every time he fainted without giving him even a single moment of peace. However, there was nothing that could possibly identify the current Liang Peng with the Liang Peng of the past. The present him was no different from a piece of bloody meat. All the skin was gone from his body, it was those shreds of different sizes casually tossed not far away. From the tip of the little toe on each foot to the top of the skull, there was no skin at all. He was crying, his appearance was horrible and he couldn't even close his eyes now that both eyelids were pulled off. Even the running tears that once caused him so much pain no longer hurt, not after all the pain he had been submitted to. But Liang Peng was wrong if he believed that there was no greater pain than what Bai Zemin had put him through. Because of you, because of your stupid lust of wanting to stay as the highest authority of a minor base, Zhongde was killed. Because of you, because of your arrogance, thousands of women among whom some were young enough to be your daughters were abused in ways you probably can't imagine. Bai Zemin took out a bucket with a strange white powder from his storage ring and picked up a handful. The smell revealed that the white powder was actually fine salt. "I am not a saint. I have certainly committed sins, and among them are some that I regret but would certainly commit again if necessary." Bai Zemin looked at Liang Peng with cold eyes and asked calmly, "What about you? Do you regret some of your sins?" While crying, Liang Peng simply moved his head a little in a nodding manner. He just wanted to die, and that was it. He would agree to whatever Bai Zemin said for the sake of dying. "I see." Bai Zemin nodded, and at the same time as he opened his fist stuffed with salt over Liang Peng's body, he muttered under his breath, "But, Liang Peng, I'm not God." Woo! The burning not unlike flames scalding the exposed flesh made Liang Peng's eyes almost explode outward as he let out the most terrifying howl so far as proof of how immense his suffering was. "And since I am not God, I don't have to forgive those who regret their sins." Bai Zemin muttered as he bent down and took another handful of salt. 20 minutes later, Liang Peng finally got his wish, his death. When Bai Zemin noticed his body convulsing and going into a stage that even his blood manipulation skill could not control, he pierced his heart before it stopped as he stared into his eyes as if to make sure Liang Peng would remember him in his next life. If there was one, of course. Bai Zemin let go of the blood sword and it soon turned into a red puddle. He raised his head to the sky and closed his eyes, and as he took a deep breath all he could smell was the now so familiar and to some extent warm as an embrace smell of blood. Several seconds later and with a strong surge of pain and weakening, Bai Zemin opened his eyes. No more red. His eyes were black, midnight black. Chapter 977 A New King Rises. Blood Berserker's wrath turned off. Amidst the sound of the wind blowing from the surroundings, the murmur of a male was almost inaudible. However, it wasn't as if there was anyone nearby capable of hearing his voice anyway. The only existence capable of hearing his voice had been killed by his own hand seconds ago, after all. Bai Zemin took out a potion to increase his recovery rate and drank it with trembling hands. The pain and exhaustion were both really a bit too much now that his body's sensors had been fully activated. Once again, the reason behind Zhongda's death, the root cause of it all was none other than Liang Peng. It was because Liang Peng started the war between factions by lying and asking for some time to form an alliance with other factions that the blood of countless living beings of different races had flowed like rivers throughout the land of Inner Mongolia. With Liang Peng being killed by his hands, the triggers of the skilled blood berserker's wrath went back into passive mode, waiting for the next cause that would trigger its activation. Good thing I waited to kill Liang Peng. Bai Zemin shook his head and began to slowly walk away as he muttered in a tired voice. If I had attacked the base with a full-scale attack and he went down, how was I supposed to fight that alligator? At full power? Behind him and as he walked away, a blue flash glowed for a second before disappearing. An instant later, a blue line separated the earth in two. Bai Zemin's black eyes flashed faintly as blue flames danced in the background, incinerating everything there bit by bit and devouring the remaining soul power in Liang Peng's corpse to strengthen itself. 2 more third-order enemies. Bai Zemin whispered to himself with a hint of regret. It was a pity that the requirement is to kill third-order enemies alone. Otherwise, the fall of the beast called Ling Yun, who was in the portal opened by the 4th-order alligator, would have counted. But with Shangguan Bing Shui and Shangguan Xingyue restraining and wounding the creature, such an opportunity was gone. It's not like I could do anything considering the circumstances at the time. Now, I think it's about time to complete that other stupid requirement. 2 weeks later. Half a month had passed since the end of the war that dyed the white snow of Inner Mongolia in red. Half a month since that day when millions of lives were lost. A war always broke out for a reason, no matter how stupid or senseless that reason was. In this case, the war had broken out because one side wanted to control and the other did not want to lose what little control it had, eventually dragging in other non-human factions that joined the battle in search of benefits promised by the weaker side. The winner took all and the loser was left with nothing. That's how cruel war was. But was that really cruelty, or was it fairness? Didn't the winner deserve to get everything? At the end of the day, no one knew if they would eventually become the victor or if they would fall and become just another chapter written in the story of the winner. Whoever was willing to risk it all deserved to get everything their opponent had. At least from this point of view, war was not cruel, but just fair. Those who suffered most, however, were the families of the fallen. Having lost more than 20,000 men, the number of families that were devastated in the Transcendent faction was not small, even though many of those men and women had only a few partners they had taken casually. Despite the pain, however, and although it was not a consolation, those families were not abandoned to their fate after losing the livelihood that kept them afloat. The rules of the faction were harsh for those who inflicted the law, but for those who fought for the common good they were nothing but advantages, a great source of peace of mind. Knowing that their loved ones would be well taken care of even if they died, the soul evolvers of the Transcendent faction could fight more at ease and without thinking about how bad the Future would be for those who could only survive in this new world thanks to them. This rule established by the upper echelons was certainly followed to the letter, and only a few days after the war in the north ended, the families of all the fallen were informed about it, while being assured that they and their next generation would receive the same treatment they were receiving thanks to the existence of the fallen warrior. There were also soul evolvers who had been disabled and could not return to the battlefield no matter how much they wanted to. Some had lost a limb, others had lost more than two or more. There were some soul evolvers who had lost their eyesight after being hit by an enemy magic skill, and there were others who were so badly injured that they would probably need at least a few months to recover and were only alive thanks to the power of the healers. Standing on top of a large building over 600 meters high, Xietain, dressed in casual clothes, looked off into the distance as the wind from the heights blew hard on his face. He had fully recovered thanks to spending a good amount of time in the collector's pocket world. He did not even require to receive healing from Kong Lan, but instead, he asked her to help Xia take care of Feng Tianwu. Feng Tianwu was still unconscious, and her skin kept getting redder and redder with each passing day. According to Callie, she didn't have much time before her soul was completely consumed by the flames, so without any other choice, Xietain took her out of the collector's pocket world where time was running faster and brought her back to the outside world. She was currently more than 100 meters underground in an ice room built by Shangguan Bingshui, and no one was allowed to go near there, as even inside the ice room the temperature was terrifyingly high. Thousands of thoughts and memories flashed through his head as he looked towards the southern wall in the process of reconstruction after the collapse caused by the battle half a month ago. "What are you thinking?" A soft, melodious voice sounded behind him, bringing Xietain out of his inner world. "No." Xietain shook his head and sighed as he replied to Shangguan Bingshui. "I was just thinking about how long the road has been to get here. It's only been a little over a year, but somehow it feels like a lifetime. Well, a lot of crazy and hard to believe things have happened." This time it was Fu Xiefeng who spoke. "Don't even mention it." Kai Jingyi sighed exaggeratedly and said helplessly, "If a year ago someone told me that I would eventually become an assassin capable of running faster than the wind, I would certainly have recommended a good mental therapist." Jingyi, do you think if a year ago someone told you that eventually your reserved personality would turn into a playful one, you would have recommended a good mental therapist? Kong Lan smiled. "Are you the one to say that?" Kai Jingyi rolled her eyes. "I guess I am not." Kong Lan chuckled. A nostalgic expression appeared on her face as she looked at everyone present one by one. "It's a pity we're not all present here." The small founding flock. Right. Wu Yin nodded with a sad expression. Not many were with Xietain at the moment. They only numbered 5, including him, and all of them had said at least one word. This small group of young adults who a year ago were nothing more than a group of students with different lives and virtually no connection to each other for the most part, was the true founding group of what was now known as the most powerful faction in all of China and the only human faction. Who would have thought that one day the small group apparently gathered by coincidence and fate would eventually become so powerful and so close-knit? Probably no one. Chen He is in the United States, and Zhongde. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Xietan's back before saying, "Zhongde is waiting for us." The 4 beside her nodded, and after a moment of silence, Xietain asked, "Yijuan, are you sure?" "Definitely, please be confident in me." She nodded firmly. "It shouldn't be long before most humans in Inner Mongolia will consider you their leader. I already moved my last card, so it should be taking effect soon." "I see." Xietain nodded before falling silent. Due to his order to slaughter all the soldiers and soul evolvers that had been part of the enemy forces during the previous war, Xietain was seen as a tyrannical demon by all the humans on the base. To say that his reputation was on the ground was no exaggeration, and he simply could not understand how Wu Yijuan could be so confident to solve that problem in just half a month. The group of 5 waited patiently. They had founded all this with blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Therefore, they wanted to witness what was about to happen. They wanted to see the moment when the one they had decided to follow to the bitter end finally ascended to a higher stage. Fortunately, the soul record seemed to feel the young people's longing and did not keep them waiting too long. As if he could feel his records being modified and evolving into something greater, Xietain slowly opened his eyes as green letters flashed across his retinas. Congratulations! It's been a long journey for you. He just read the first few words and slowly closed his eyes. They, who were just normal students months ago, were forced to discard their former selves for the sake of survival. They ignored the pain in their bodies and ignored the tears falling from their eyes, all for the sake of living. At least one more second. With a long sigh, he opened them again and said softly, "Really, it's been a long journey, for everyone." They just wanted to build a quiet and safe place, and they were certainly far from achieving it. However, this was a good start. Chapter 978 King of China, Mankind's Pioneer. Congratulations! More than 90% of China's mankind has reunited under your leadership. The major cities and districts of the country have fallen under your control. The number of intelligent beings under your rule has broken the 40.000.000 barrier. Your subclass evolves. Congratulations, now that you control your race within a large expanse of land, your subclass has evolved to King. King, fighting in your territory against any race increases your natural stats by 50% at the same time your subordinate stats increase by 25% when they fight for you. Your physical and magical defense increases by 100% when fighting other humans within the home world, and your wound recovery rate increases by 200% when you are out of combat. When another king invades your territory, the battle power of all your subordinates increases by 50%, and when their lives are in danger as they fight an enemy, their power increases by 30%. Your titles: ruler of Beijing, ruler of Heilongjiang, ruler of Jilin, ruler of Liaoning, ruler of Shandong, ruler of Jiangsu, ruler of Zhenjiang, ruler of Fujian, ruler of Anhui, ruler of merge and become one. You need to choose a name for your territory before continuing with the evolution of records. HM? Xietain blinked in surprise at the last message. Choosing a name for his territory? This was something he had not expected. However, after thinking about it again, Xietain realized that there was nothing to be surprised about, since he was the highest authority among the humans of old China and had now been officially named king of the humans within that territory. It was only natural that he should be given the privilege of choosing what he wanted his kingdom to be called. Is something wrong? Shangguan Bingshui asked as she heard the sound he made. Oh, it's just that something interesting just happened. Xietain explained the situation to them, and after the initial excitement of knowing that he had finally been officially promoted to king, everyone began to mutter under their breath. A new name? Transcendent? I don't think so. Transcendent is the name of the faction that represents us, not a territory. Shangguan Bingshui looked at the four who were discussing excitedly about what to name the new kingdom before shaking her head. You all are overthinking it, she said. Wu Yijuan blinked and said in confusion, what do you mean? Shangguan Bingshui looked at Xietain, and although he said nothing, she proved to be able to read him like an open book. This is just the beginning, we will not stop here. We will give each conquered kingdom a new name. What will happen when we go to other worlds? It is not as easy as changing names. The citizens of that territory were born and raised knowing a name and will not get used to an unnecessary change so easily. We just need to remember that a piece of land does not represent us. That's how it is. Xietain nodded. China is China, simple. When we conquer Russia tomorrow, it will still be Russia, and the same with all the others. As Bingshui well said, a piece of land does not represent us. Our faction already has a name, everything else is secondary. Xietain closed his eyes and thought in his heart, continue to use the name China for the new kingdom. The kingdom of China has been formed. All the ruler type titles attached to your previous subclass have merged and evolved into something bigger. You have received the title King of China. King of China, you can teleport anywhere in China as long as you are out of combat for at least 20 minutes. The effect of the title is not limited to use on Earth, and you can teleport to your kingdom even if you are on other worlds. The power of the title can be used once every 2 days on Earth, but only once every 1 per year when you are on another world. Just when Xietain thought the notifications were over, a new surprise fell into his lap in a figurative sense. Congratulations! You are the first human being to obtain a king-type title. You have been rewarded with the 3rd Order Level 3 skill, Mankind's Pioneer. The skill Mankind's Pioneer was an active skill that had not 1 but 2 activations, and when Xietain saw the effect of each activation, his pupils trembled wildly and his heart trembled with fear at the possibility of missing out on this reward. So, sitting in the building that formerly belonged to Liangpeng, Xietain calmly took a sip of the tea that the maid, formerly one of the women abused by Liangpeng, handed to her and blinked her eyes towards Xietain. You have become king? That's right. Xietain nodded without hiding anything. There have been reports from the different bases, which confirm that all of my subordinates have received a great power boost while fighting wandering mutant beasts. This coincides with the records I obtained after taking control over Inner Mongolia, so yes, you can say that at this moment and from now on I am officially the human king of China. Human king, Xietain sighed and leaned back on the backrest. She gently raised her head to look at the stone ceiling and said with a hint of bitterness in her voice, I still remember our first meeting. Back then, although you were certainly very powerful, your faction had a few thousand men at most. After a few seconds of silence, she lowered her head to look Xietain in the eyes and said in a clear voice, to be frankly honest with you, myself back then was too weak and certainly somewhat naive. Were it not for your and Bing Shui's strength, I would never have formed an alliance with such a weak faction. That kinda hurts. Xietain smiled bitterly and shook his head. On his lap, Xiao Xiao in the form of a small pink dolphin was sleeping comfortably. She would occasionally squirm a little, and Xietain would immediately put his hand to work giving gentle caresses to the cuddly little female dolphin. It's the truth, and you know it. Xietain sighed. Her eyes flashed with complex emotions as she softly said, but that weak faction has now grown to this point. Even I who was and am a princess have been left behind by you in terms of status. In that fateful encounter between the two, Xietain was no more than a soul evolver with a great personal power that could be called shocking and a weak group of people following him. On the other hand, Xietain was a genius capable of fighting third-order enemies while in the second order, a princess of a great sea kingdom, and with at least a few thousand soldiers after losing most of her army in the Bridge War. Regardless of being the weakest among the older siblings, with the right to the throne, Xietain was certainly above him in terms of status and capability to recruit soldiers. However, what about now? No matter which way she looked at it, Xietain simply could not find a reason why the current Xietain and his faction would want to be in alliance with someone like her. Are you sure you want to be in an alliance with me and not one of my siblings? She inquired. Xietain naturally understood what Xietain was thinking, however, he shook his head and without stopping his caresses on the little pink dolphin, calmly stated his thoughts. Princess, even though the current you in fact don't have much to offer in terms of power, it takes more than brute strength to reach a long distance. He looked into her eyes and said in a deep voice, even if I am strong I am certainly not invincible. The battle against that alligator made that more than clear to me. If you have strength but don't use your brain, you will eventually fall. In other words, do you have a reason to stay in alliance with me? Xietain nodded slowly. Indeed. The reason I want to help you become the Queen of the Seas is because tomorrow, when I conquer the surface, I don't want countless sea creatures to suddenly go out under the command of some greedy little bastard. Do you understand what I'm saying? Xietain smiled slightly. I don't know whether to feel offended or grateful that you underestimate me so much. Xietain grimaced. Underestimate? No, I don't think I'm underestimating you. I don't underestimate anyone, that's why I'm still alive after all. Xietain shook his head before staring into her eyes. His black eyes glittered with a hint of coldness that didn't pair very well with the friendly smile on his face. It's just that you have seen what I can do. You have seen the power of being Xue and my people. Therefore, you won't want to be an enemy of my transcendent faction. The expression of Xietain Mayer changed slightly, and a second later a bitter smile appeared on her face. I see. I get what you mean. Indeed, Xietain was right. Xietain Mayer certainly didn't want any trouble with this human group. Well, that, and there's also the fact that you hate war. Besides, Xiao Xiao loves both of us, right? And since we love her, we certainly wouldn't want to make her sad. Xietain said to lighten things up a bit, but in an honest voice. While Xietain handed off all the work to the others, he chatted with Xietain Mayer about their next move. So, Princess. Xietan's expression became serious as he said in a deep voice, when will the last trial for the succession to the throne be? 4 days. Xietain Mayer responded with a frown. My past self was not interested and neither did have the strength to fight. But after your words opened my eyes that day, I decided to fight, and with the support of your faction I managed to gather a large number of soldiers. After many months of even forcing some of my siblings to retreat and take part of their territories, the royal father recognized my power and added me to the board. In other words, the king of the East Sea was a spectator watching a peculiar chess game with his offspring being the hands moving the pieces in an attempt to seize the other's territory and overthrow the leader. Xietain Mayer had earned the right to enter the battle thanks to her rapid growth and not falling behind at all. But, I don't have many soldiers now. I'm afraid the current me no longer has time to gather troops and fight against my siblings. She frowned tightly and a worried expression shone on her beautiful face. In that case, how about I help you? Xietain stood up. Help me? In what way? Xietain Mayer followed him with her eyes. He stopped standing by the large window and while caressing Xiao Xiao said slowly, for the past half-month, I was resting half the time to recover from the heavy injuries I suffered during the battle against the alligator that supports your brother the third prince. As for the other half, I've been looking for third-order enemies to kill. He continued, Princess, I need to kill 2 third-order soul evolvers with my own hands to finally evolve to the next order, but third-order soul evolvers are leader-level powerhouses and certainly can't be found casually, just because one wants to find them. 2 third-order soul evolvers? That's your final requirement for. Realizing something, Xietain Mayer paused and her lips trembled as she asked in a low voice, How many? How many third-order soul evolvers do you need to kill in total, and how many did you kill already? In her eyes, asking a first-order soul evolver to kill one single third-order soul evolver was insane beyond insanity. In fact, that first-order soul evolver would be considered a genius if they were able to survive 2 attacks from a third-order soul evolver. However, Xietain had been stuck in the first order for almost a year. And Xietain Mayer had seen him killing several third-order soul evolvers in their brief encounters. That meant that the number he had to kill was not simply 2. Chapter 979 The Last Gift and the Last Words of the Queen. The past number no longer matters. Xietain dismissed Xietain Mayer's question with ease. Sorry, it was disrespectful and insensitive of me to ask such a private thing, she said quickly after realizing her mistake. Knowing the evolution requirements of a soul evolver in part would reveal the kind of potential and a good portion of the immediate strength that the soul evolver would have after advancing to the next order. Xietain Mayer had been too surprised after finally realizing how crazy Xietan's evolution requirements were, so she ended up forgetting that asking questions like that was considered taboo and had simply asked the question in automatic mode. The real problem now is that I'm 2 third-order soul evolvers short of evolving. Xietain continued, and naturally I can't kill my soldiers. I'll just say it just in case, but I won't let you kill Xietain nor Yuan. Xietain Mayer said, referring to the 2 third-order Triton females following her. I am aware of that. Don't worry, I never thought about doing harm to them. Xietain sighed. He turned and looked into her eyes, therefore. I have more chance to evolve fast if I go with you to the bottom of the sea. What did you say? Xietain Mayer asked subconsciously as she blinked repeatedly. From what you told me earlier, your father loves you all, but he certainly supports the competition among you siblings to the point that he won't intervene even if you kill each other, is that right? Xietain shrugged and said indifferently, therefore, I plan to go with you to the East Sea to help you become the next queen of the East Sea, or Forgotten Queen as you call this position. While I'm at it, I'll kill the third Prince Xietain and take that strange plant that presumably helps to automatically complete an evolution requirement. I'll just be short of killing a third-order soul evolver, but I guess killing some soldier of another of your siblings will do the trick. After saying this, Xietain fell silent and looked at Xietain Mayer waiting for her opinion on the matter. For almost a full minute, the seventh Princess Xietain Mayer just stared at him with her beautiful deep blue eyes, barely blinking in the process. Could it be that you're really out of your mind? Those are some good first words you've got there after being mute for practically half a lifetime. Xietain looked at her at a loss for words. Can you blame me? She pressed her brow with some force and said wearily, Xietain, are you forgetting that if you go into the sea you'll have to fight the alligator my brother found somewhere? She glanced sideways at him and said slowly, no offense, but the current you no longer gives me the same feeling of oppression as before. I assume it has something to do with the change in your eye color, but whatever it is undeniable that you are weaker than before. The meaning behind the words of Xietain Mayer was simple. He couldn't defeat the alligator being at a much more powerful echelon than his current one, so she wanted to know where his confidence came from to want to face the same enemy now that he was weaker. Well, even though that alligator might have recovered, which I somewhat doubt, the arm he lost after being hit by the cosmic particle cannon certainly shouldn't be back. Even if he had some skill or regenerative ability, I refuse to believe that in such a short time he managed to recover an entire limb. Xietain said before sighing. Even so, my current self certainly can't defeat him unless I manage to hit him with my strongest attack, which is unlikely now that Sir Alligator knows of its existence. He'll certainly be more attentive next time. Even knowing that, do you want to go to the East Sea with me? Xietain Mayer looked at him with eyes of someone who was looking at a genuine lunatic. I feel grateful for your good intention and all, but I'd rather you didn't throw your life away, you know? I need you alive for this alliance to work. This time it was the turn of Xietain to roll his eyes. For God's sake, do you think I'm planning to go to the East Sea and die just like that? Xietain proceeded to tell Xietain Mayer his idea, but when he finished all he got from her was a blank stare before the mermaid princess finished him off. You are crazy after all, aren't you? Just because it's hard to do doesn't mean I'm crazy. Xietain argued back. Gambling your life and other people's lives like that. I can't say I agree with your way of looking at things, Xietain. Xietain Mayer stood up after saying this and walked towards the door with the intention of leaving. However, before leaving she stopped and said without looking back, you can count on me. Although I still think what you are doing is a bad idea. Xietain silently looked at the place where she had been a moment ago, and after a few seconds, he muttered to himself, it's not like I have any other choice. The time limit is approaching. He turned and looked out the large window at the world outside. His eyes were complicated because he knew Xietain Mayer was right. What he was planning to do was quite insane, especially since it involved the lives of people he held dear to his heart. Of course, he was doing this because he certainly had some confidence, or else he would never put into practice something like what he had in mind. It was just that some confidence was not absolute confidence to succeed. 3 days passed in an instant for the members of the Transcendent faction who were busy with all sorts of tasks ranging from hunting monsters and harvesting crops to strengthening the walls and studying the technology obtained in order to empower everyone as a group. 3 days ago, on the night of the same day that Xietain had an important conversation with the 7th Princess of the East Sea, an assault helicopter coming from the north of Beijing landed on the airstrip of the first base that the Transcendent faction had erected in Inner Mongolia before the war against Liangpeng and the alliance completely broke out. There was only one person riding in that combat helicopter other than the pilot, Ming Qi. She was welcomed by Kong Jun, who without saying a word guided her to the military facility near the airstrip. Although the Transcendent faction had managed to take control over Inner Mongolia, there was still a lot of work to do, especially when it came to distributing the population. Some bases in Inner Mongolia might have to be abandoned as there were simply not enough people to occupy all the bases. Therefore, the first base was deserted, although this would certainly change in the days to come as this base was an important fort needed to connect northern Beijing with Inner Mongolia, as well as serving as an outpost to stop the wild sea creatures that only sought blood. As Meng Qi entered one of the buildings inside the military zone, her expression lit up and with quick steps, she walked towards the handsome young man waiting for her with a faint smile. "King of China, she said without breaking the hug. "Who would have thought?" Bai Zemin chuckled. Meng Qi moved away only far enough to look him in the eyes, but not too far to miss his warmth. Her eyes twinkled slightly as she met her big brother's black eyes, and in a soft but happy voice she remarked, "I always believed in you, and still do of course. I always knew that my wonderful older brother was being limited by the world he was born into. And look at you now, hasn't life proved me right? Girl, with that silver tongue of yours, if you're not careful what you say you'll end up making even more young men fall for you than have already fallen for you." Bai Zemin shook his head. "Regarding that, you don't need to worry." Meng Qi took a step back and held up a finger as she closed her eyes and said in a teasing tone, "My silver tongue is only yours, so there's no danger of crushes." Bai Zemin chuckled before putting on a serious expression, and seeing this Meng Qi also became serious. He had already told her everything through long-distance communication, there was no more to explain. "Are you ready?" "Since always." And so, a total of 30 days passed inside the collector's pocket watch. During those 30 days, Bai Zemin, Shangguan Bing Shui, Shangguan Xinyue, Wu Ejiwen, Kong Jun, Evangeline, and Xian Meier trained by fighting as a team to increase coordination between them all. However, Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bing Shui never teamed up during the entire training because the two of them had come to the conclusion that it was impossible for them to increase even more the practically divine coordination they shared on the battlefield, considering that they could understand each other just by looking into the eyes of the other. Of course, they all held back and did not let go completely. They wanted to put their attacks and coordination into practice after all, not fight each other to the death. Although it was true that letting Xian Meier enter the collector's pocket world might not be the best idea, the circumstances were harsh enough to pressure Bai Zemin into doing something he would rather not do. Another proof that he was not an omnipotent existence. As for Meng Qi, she spent the 30 days together with Callie. The little porcelain doll drew various runes on some metal objects similar to flat discs and then taught Meng Qi the function of each rune, how to activate them, and in what order/position she needed to place each metal disc for the true power of the set of runes to be revealed. 30 days later for them, but only 3 days for the rest of the universe that was not inside a formation or treasure capable of affecting the passage of time. Bai Zemin met everyone in the still unfinished house and pushed them to enjoy a great meal all together. Shangguan Bing Shui, "Hey, when will you finish building this house?" Bai Zemin, "Little Bing Shui, Daddy is too busy right now." Xian Meier, "Why do you refer to yourself as Daddy and call her little? It's impossible for you to be Bing Shui's father, she is older than you." Meng Qi, "Believe me, it will be better for your innocence if you don't ask any more questions." Everyone. Callie listened to the amused and carefree conversation of the group in front of her. Despite being so young, she was certainly mature enough to understand that they were doing this knowing well that this could be their last meal. The battle to come was one that even Bai Zemin was not confident about, so the possibilities of dying were certainly not low. However, they had all been ready to die since the day they killed their first zombie or mutant beast. They were soul evolvers, they breathed death and stepped on bones. Such was the world they lived in now. No one had a guaranteed tomorrow. It was just that this time the chances of never seeing the sun again were higher than normal, that was all. "Everyone, are you ready?" Bai Zemin asked in a serious voice. Although no one said anything and they simply nodded, Bai Zemin could not see even the slightest trace of hesitation in the eyes of any of his teammates. In that case, this Bai Zemin stopped and looked at Kong Jun in confusion. Kong Jun, is something wrong? The over 2-meter tall ant took a step forward, his body fully revealed. This. He extended his claw covered by a shiny jet black exoskeleton forward and said in a robot-like voice, Her Majesty asked me to give this to you. Her Majesty? Was it Bai Sherlin? Confused, Bai Zemin subconsciously took the small glowing stone Kong Jun was handing him. It was a third-order soul stone. Bai Zemin recognized it easily. Kong Jun, why did Sherlin want you to give this to me? However, the former queen's guardian shook his head and said slowly, It was not Her Majesty the princess, but Her Majesty the queen. Her Majesty Sherlin? Bai Zemin was greatly surprised at the same time as confusion swept over him more strongly than before. The former queen of the Weaver Ant Sherlin, the first mother of Bai Sherlin. An existence that Bai Zemin, unfortunately, did not get to know too well, but that was always a mystery. Her Majesty. She saw this day today. Kong Jun's bright red eyes shone like flashlights as he said emotionlessly, Her Majesty Sherlin said before she left, that you would need this, and that I should give it to you before the veil that covers the world gets uncovered. Chapter 980 Peculiarity of the Abyssal Rift, Part 1. Are you sure it's a good idea to leave the outpost base without any protection? Shangguan Bingshui asked as she looked into the distance. The group was currently very close to the coast of the East Sea. This was a very nostalgic place for Bai Zemin, Wu Yijuan, and Shangguan Bingshui. After all, they were on the edge of the Yanqing district. The district where the formerly prestigious and extremely crowded Beijing University was located. It was precisely the place where the three of them were when it all began a little over a year ago. The outpost base at the edge of Inner Mongolia is an important base, but we could also consider it a risky one. Bai Zemin said as he looked out over the calm waters of the huge sea before his eyes. When we are done with all this, we can easily take it back again in case someone were to take it, which is not very likely. Well, we'll come back stronger than ever after all. Wu Yijuan hesitated for a moment before finally pointing out, but what if the base is destroyed? If the base is destroyed, we just have to raise it up again. Bai Zemin smiled slightly and said with a hint of mockery, even if an intelligent soul evolver were to happen to get into the base, they would only find a bunch of trash. He had stored all the important things in the collector's pocket world after all. The more time passed, the more Bai Zemin was grateful to the collector's pocket watch. Quite an interesting name, considering that it could actually be viewed as a treasure house for collecting and storing things in large quantities as if they were P***Chem***NS. Bai Zemin looked at everyone present and said in a serious voice, Everyone, you all remember our plan, don't you? We will try to avoid conflict against the alligator. If possible, we don't even want to see him. Our priority is to find 2 third-order monsters as soon as possible while heading to the kingdom of Xietain. Xietain nodded. When we get to Krya City, won't need to worry about being attacked all of a sudden. Now that the succession to the throne will begin in a day's time, my royal father will certainly not allow conflicts, and security will most probably be multiplied, so there should be no problem. But your father, the East Sea King, has only broken into the 4th Order recently, hasn't he? Shangguan Xingyue pointed out with a frown. I don't think he is stronger than the alligator, no matter how optimistic I want to be. Although the others did not say anything, it was clear from their expressions that they thought the same thing. Shangguan Xingyue had said sharply. Regarding that, there is no need to worry. Xietain shook her head and said softly, although my royal father is certainly not as strong as that alligator, Krya City's defenses are really powerful. There are several cosmic particle cannons around the city and many secondary cannons whose attack power is not small. Even my third brother's bodyguard won't dare to cause trouble there, I guarantee it. If you say so. Shangguan Bingshui sighed. She looked out at the seemingly endless sea ahead of them and muttered something that only she could hear. Seeing that the discussions seemed to be over, Xietain looked at one of the 2 female tritons and calmly said, Xietain, give me that. One of the 2 female tritons, the one carrying a black waterproof bag, pulled the string of the bag over her head and handed it to Xietain with a respectful expression. Under the confused eyes of everyone, Xietain Mayer took out multiple full-face masks. All of the masks were ash gray with a small rune on the forehead and numerous blue-colored lines around the circumference. Although you guys can hold your breath for several hours underwater, the consumption of mana and stamina will certainly not be small. Xietain Mayer passed a mask to each of them as she calmly said, "Since we don't even know what will happen down there, it will be wise to save as much strength as possible." Xietain and the others were confused, but when they saw the records that made up each mask they finally understood. Shipwrecked mask, rare grade treasure. A treasure that allows the wearer to breathe underwater for 20 hours uninterrupted. After its use, 12 hours are required before the special skill of the shipwrecked mask can be used again. Oh, this is pretty cool and handy. Xietan's eyes immediately lit up. Indeed. Wu Yijun nodded. Although there are no extra statistics, the ability to breathe underwater is something that can be life-saving depending on the circumstance. Away from the sea, this kind of treasure is certainly not something worth mentioning. Shangguan Bingshui ran her palm over the surface of the mask before bringing it to her face. Although the mask had no holes, she did not complain, which meant she could see clearly, but right now these masks are a great treasure. I took them from the treasure of my family. Xietain Mayer said casually, to us, sea creatures, those masks are useless but still treasures, so they were saved. I'm glad I brought some with me just in case. Soon, they all started walking towards the shore and with 7 splashes their bodies disappeared into the waters. All except one of them. Xietain looked back and raised his head to the sky. His black eyes seemed to look beyond the gray clouds, and one could see a bit of desolation and a bit of sadness in his stare. It had been over a month since Lilith had left, and Xietain naturally hadn't heard a word about her. He missed her a lot, missed her so much that he needed to keep his head busy with anything to avoid thinking about her too much and end up becoming sentimental, as such a thing would end up affecting him during important decision-making. I hope you're well, my naughty little succubus. He muttered in a voice as low as the buzzing of a mosquito. Xietain didn't know how this battle was going to end, and certainly, the chances of him dying weren't particularly small this time. He might never be able to see her again, and the very thought of it made him surprisingly sadder than the thought of never seeing his family again. Xietain, what are you doing? If we don't hurry, we'll never make it in time. I'm coming. Xietain called out back at the sound of Shangguan Bingshui's voice. After a last but long stare at the distant sky, he ran to the shore and with a quick jump submerged into deep water. Approximately 1.5 months ago. After leaving Earth, Lilith continued jumping through space for 4 whole days before finally entering the planetary zone where Cram World was located, the world where the central base of the demonic army was located. Of course, entering or finding this planetary zone was not easy, as it not only changed location constantly but was also hidden by powerful magic spells that made it difficult for others to find the place. All the higher worlds under the control of the various higher existence factions were exactly the same, so cases of a higher existence faction attacking the home of others was not normal at all. There were several demons flying around the area, all of them wearing shining armor and spears or swords that made them look especially powerful. They were, indeed, powerful. However, none of these fifth-order existences put up any obstacle when they saw Lilith flapping her black raven wings behind her back. She ignored the stares of all the men, which were not few now that she was no longer holding back her natural charm at all. With an ice-cold expression and deadly indifferent eyes, a colossal contrast compared to her expression when she was beside Xietain, she descended on top of the mountain where the castle of the demon lord was stationed and casually walked towards the entrance. Lady Lilith. The 2 guards at the entrance immediately grew nervous and out of instinct bowed as they called her name. Lilith didn't even bother to nod, but the 2 soldiers of the demonic army didn't mind, as they all knew that the bloody succubus Lilith was a woman of few words. Arrogant or not, she had all the qualifications to be arrogant, not only because of her beauty that transcended even the sense of the higher existences, but also because of her personal strength. Lilith encountered several members of the faction as she walked through the long corridors of the great castle, but she ignored them all and walked with a destination in mind already fixed. Every step she took was as if she was teleporting as she left images of her past self constantly, moving hundreds of meters per second. She looked extremely small compared to how high the ceiling separating the first floor from the second floor of the castle was, but after a few minutes, she finally stopped for a moment in front of the huge stone door. When Lilith opened the stone door, what greeted her was a completely empty room. Well, almost completely empty room. In the meeting room, sitting in her designated seat immediately to the right of the small stone throne, Fire Sorrow raised her head and greeted her with a slight smile. "Lilith, you're early." Lilith walked into the meeting room and the door behind closed with a soft bang. She sat down and after looking around the room asked in confusion, "No one's here yet?" She was grateful to Fire Sorrow for teaching her magic before and also liked her straightforward and mature personality a bit, therefore, Lilith softened her tone with her quite a bit. "Other than the two of us? No one else." Fire Sorrow shook her head slightly, causing her long violet hair to shake lightly as she kept her smile. "We haven't seen each other for. Come to think of it, this is the first time we've met 2 times in less than a year. Well, being summoned by His Majesty isn't normal after all, since he would rather sleep." Lilith shrugged her shoulders. "Hee. True, you're right about that." Fire Sorrow covered her mouth and let out an amused chuckle. It wasn't at all normal for them to meet twice in the same year. They usually only met once a year at most, and that was only if they were tasked with guarding some higher world, or in charge of searching for some kind of treasure or resource, else they were free to do whatever they felt like as long as it didn't cause problems for the faction. Therefore, meeting 2 times in less than 12 months was certainly a great rarity. After a few minutes of silence, Lilith asked, just by random but, "Fire Sorrow, do you know the reason why His Majesty asked me to come to Cram World? Probably for the same reason I'm here, I guess. But even I don't know what Her Majesty is thinking." Fire Sorrow sighed. "I don't even know to whom he summoned this time, but it seems to be something pretty big." "That seems to be the case." Lilith nodded. Her ruby-colored eyes glittered slightly as she recalled that on the way she had run into many members of the demonic army flying towards Cram World, tens of thousands of them in the span of 4 days. After that, Lilith and Fire Sorrow did not speak again. Higher existences were quite eccentric even if they did not look any different from young lower existences with less than 100 years. Even Lilith, despite being so young, had lived through too many things to make her personality very much like that of monsters hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years old. The fact that she was always cheerful and joking along with Xietain and those around him was reserved for that limited group of people, the rest would get nothing more than necessary from her, and some not even that.